unfortunately, we only have the room till 7:30. Given the great comments and discussion we had at the last hearing, we're going to try and be a little quicker on our end, want to continue to hear the wonderful feedback. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I know a couple of my colleagues are on their way. They got stuck in traffic, which I appreciate you all for navigating that traffic as well. Again, want to thank the staff for their work and preparation for this hearing. Tonight is the second hearing on proposed short-term rental legislation in the City of Columbus. Again, we have Aaron Beck with the Mayor's Office as well. Want to thank Ken Paul for his work on the proposed legislation. Members of my staff, Cold Voidach, Kevin McCain, our intern, Patrick Brugelman, CTV for broadcasting this hearing, our host at Schiller Park Recreation Center. Apologize, we're working on air conditioning to get in their budget. And all the other interested parties and individuals we have met over the past year and a half. Again, the point of the hearing is, again, for us to hear your feedback. Really appreciated all the discussion we had a couple weeks ago at Whetstone and look forward to continuing to have that feedback. Because we're already gathering about 20 speakers, this hearing, we are going to limit speaking to 3 minutes. That's not my preference, but that way if any members have questions, they can provide that. But we will do a 3-minute limit. I see my colleague, Councilwoman Priscilla Tyson, is arrived, and welcome you, Priscilla. Again, we're looking for as much feedback as possible. It's an issue that we know across this country, across the world, different cities have approached it, and we're trying to find what's going to be best for Columbus residents, Columbus neighborhoods, and continue to move us forward. Again, we're not looking to, we're just really looking for that ongoing feedback, individuals' experiences, good or bad, the experience as a host. So again, no decisions will be made tonight. The goal is to continue to listen and gather feedback. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Beck to do a quick overview of the proposal, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Stinziano, for the opportunity to be here this evening and for your efforts to address this important issue in our community. As the council member mentioned, my name's Aaron Beck. I'm a policy advisor in Mayor Ginther's office and have been working with Council Member Stinziano's office on this issue. So first of all, I just wanted to start with a short overview of why the City of Columbus and really any community is beginning to address short-term rentals. And so really there are 4 points that I wanted to outline. So short-term rentals really have grown and are continuing to grow in popularity. So I pulled out here just an article that was from Columbus Business First talking about Columbus being one of the hottest growth markets in 2018. And so while Airbnb is the most well-known, we're really talking about the hundreds of listing sites such as HomeAway, VRBO, Couchsurfing, Flipkey, Tripping, and many more. So that just kind of is evidence of its growth over the years. There are challenges around impacts on neighborhoods and communities in urban areas where you find a lot of close proximity. So especially we start to see with the transient guests, sometimes neighbors will complain a little bit more about the noise level, partying, just a fear or unease of strangers coming and going in their community in an area that previously had been more of a residential area. And then that can also lead to impacts on other services as well. So it can lead to an increase in parking and issues related to parking. So other service-related issues such as trash when you have kind of an increase of those transient guests coming and going. That isn't to say that that always happens, but it is an issue that can arise. And then certainly we have concerns around safety, so we want to ensure that the safety of all residents, our guests, and even the hosts as well, that we're providing some level of safety there. So really, it's looking at appropriate levels of occupancy, that the housing meets housing code requirements, there are sanitary conditions such as no tall grass or rodents. These are all kind of items that are covered under other areas of code, but that you still want to make sure that that housing is meeting those standard minimum qualifications. And then there also are concerns around long-term housing availability and affordability. So as I have up here on the PowerPoint, there's really some emerging research and a recent study that finds a 10% increase in Airbnb listings leads to a 0.39% increase in rents and a 0.65% increase in home values, and that the impact is really stronger in neighborhoods with absentee landlords, and there's an incentive to remove properties from the long-term rental market and convert them into short-term rentals. So that can cause rents for long-term leases to increase. Again, this is pretty emerging research. It's not to say that that's what's happening here in Columbus, but it's something that to keep in mind as we're looking at this issue and really addressing this issue in our community. And so really our goal from the beginning was to find a Goldilocks zone that really balanced the well-being and interests of our city residents, our neighborhoods and communities, while also allowing short-term rentals to operate and really still be a strong part of our economic and tourism fabric. So this really all started when Councilmember Stinziano was approached by residents during community hours with concerns about short-term rentals. That drove the mayor's office and Councilmember Stinziano's office to start researching the issue. That was in 2016, and then we've held many stakeholder meetings over the last year to get input and further understanding around this issue, and that's what's led us to today and the draft proposal that we have. And so with the proposal itself, I know you all have the briefing that's available and the legislation, so I won't go through all of this word for word, but the legislation does implement the idea of a permit, and that would be an annual permit through the licensing department. And then with the host regulations, it would require that the host either be an owner or permanent occupant who's the primary resident, meaning that they're residing at the property more than 51% of the time. And with that primary residency, a host can operate 365. If it is a secondary property and you aren't the primary resident, we are proposing a cap of 104 days. And then there are a few other host regulations as well, such as the non-discrimination language that has been added. The draft proposal does also introduce the concept of hosting platforms and sets regulations around the hosting platforms. So that's going to be Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, those kinds of sites. And it really requires them to only list the short-term rentals that have a valid city permit. And then, of course, there are some other regulations built in there as well. Regulations and penalties, those really pertain to just in terms of what's next. We're holding these public hearings for input and comment, just as Councilmember Stinziano already mentioned. We are planning to add in a delayed implementation period, so that would give time for the community to become more educated on the legislation and regulations that have passed and obtain the proper permitting. And then we're also working with the auditor's office on companion legislation regarding the tax collection. And that is really all I have for you tonight, so just as the council member said.
A follow-up question, but before I do, I want to remind everyone, if you would like to speak, please fill out one of the blue speaker slips in the back. If you don't fill out the blue speaker slip, we don't know that you want to speak, and so not that we want to overlook you, but we need you to fill out the sheets, blue speaker slips in the back. One thing, particularly from the last hearing, there seemed a little bit of confusion of maybe what other cities do. Could you give a brief overview of some of the cities we've looked at and what their regulation, and kind of when you mentioned we were looking to try and find a sweet spot of, you've overviewed this proposal, what other cities may have?
Certainly. So I went through that really quickly, mostly so that we could have plenty of time for all of you to give comment tonight, but we definitely looked at a lot of other cities and what they were proposing around short-term rentals and these kinds of properties. So for example, in San Francisco, you do have to be the permanent resident, and you can only rent, so you have to be the permanent resident. You cannot operate if you do not live on site at the property. And then if you aren't there, you can only operate up to 90 days a year. So if you're not there while the guest is staying at your home. And so in New Orleans, they are considering a 90-day cap. Well, they have a 90-day cap, I'm sorry. And then in Portland, you can also rent out a primary residence at least 207 days of the year. However, you can only be rented in your absence 95 days out of the year. So again, you have to be the primary resident in order to operate. You cannot operate if it's a secondary property. And so those are just a few of them to pull out from there. So.
Any cities with over 104 days?
Yes, there definitely are cities that have more than that. So there's Philadelphia has a 180-day cap. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Aaron. Please don't talk from the audience unless you'd like to. Fill out a speaker slip. First, I'd like to invite up Brandon Hatton to offer his testimony on behalf of Airbnb. Again, Mr. Hatton, you got 3 minutes.
I will try to make this work in 3 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. Airbnb is pleased to be here in Columbus to discuss the issue of home sharing and how it positively impacts our hundreds of hosts and more than 58,000 guests who visited the city last year. Our hosts and many of the people in this room are ambassadors to Columbus. They're welcoming families, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and guiding guests towards neighborhood attractions, restaurants, and small businesses. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the thoughtfulness that's gone into this bill already. Upon reading it the first time, it was very clear a lot of research had been done, and I want to applaud you all for that. I think a registration system is something that we've talked about in a number of cities, and it's a great way to understand exactly who's participating in the short-term rental community. Linking the permits to unique addresses instead of individuals is a great way to know where the STRs are throughout your community, allowing the city to make swift actions on bad actors, people who are being disruptive to the fiber of the community. However, today I'd like to stand in unison with some of the voices I heard 2 weeks ago and echo the idea that the 104-night cap is a bit onerous and should be raised or lifted because it creates unnecessary obstacles for Airbnb hosts to participate in the economic and social benefits of the home sharing community. The citizens who rely on the short-term rental revenue to pay for their mortgages, afford childcare, or invest in costly home repairs would be hurt the most by this cap. Additionally, the proposed legislation raises concerns about compliance with federal platform liability and privacy laws. Provisions that require platforms to perform certain actions that would run afoul of federal law, such as the Communications and Decency Act, which prohibits state and local governments from holding platforms liable for content created by people who use their website, and the Stored Communications Act, which requires governmental entities to use an administrative subpoena or court order to obtain user information. In order to comply with the SCA, entities like Airbnb cannot disclose user data without the appropriate process. The SCA requires that governmental entities use an administrative subpoena or court order to obtain user information. In particular, the bill prohibits platforms from including unlicensed listings, which would plainly violate the CDA. In addition, the bill compels the disclosure of user data without legal process. It's an issue we take very seriously in protecting the data of the users of our platform. It's an issue we've taken seriously from day one, and we're going to continue to fight to protect the data of the folks who are on our platform. Over the past 2 years, we've worked with a number of jurisdictions to find common sense solutions that work for hosts and the communities that they live in. These engagements have produced fruitful discussions that have driven policy decisions rooted in facts. We support paying taxes and reasonable regulations for the industry. We believe both are necessary to provide our community with clear rules for operating and fulfilling civic obligations. I'd like to reiterate, we do not oppose taxes, we do not oppose regulations, and we look forward to working with the City of Columbus moving forward to find a middle ground for folks here in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatton. Next, I'd like to invite John Myers to offer remarks on behalf of the Columbus Realtors.
Good evening, Council Pro Tem Stenziano and members of Council that are here. My name is John Myers. I am President-elect of Columbus Realtors. I'm also speaking on behalf of the Columbus Apartment Association. Both trade organizations have the same interest and concerns with this legislation. I'm also a short-term rental host myself and also broker-owner of Myers Real Estate. Considerable amount of our business involves property management. Again tonight, we have many of the 7,800 Columbus Realtor members present, several of whom are short-term rental hosts, but all who believe in private property rights and responsible property ownership. I will keep this brief as council and the administration know our positions on this issue. Our members certainly understand concerns surrounding short-term rentals. We fully realize there are a few bad actors and it takes just one. However, we believe the issues mentioned are best handled by the appropriate authorities, and the issues aren't just limited to short-term rentals. As a property manager, I can assure you sound, trash, partying, parking, funny smells can be a nuisance for all types of property, not just short-term rentals. This can include owner-occupied properties or a hotel. If there's an unwanted or illegal activity next door, they can be reported to the appropriate authority and dealt with. While we heard a few stories at the last hearing, we are likely to hear a few tonight. The cap on days wouldn't be effective in addressing any of those concerns. What it would do is essentially ban non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Not to mention it is likely unenforceable. Restricting the ability of property owners to rent their property is not the Columbus way. As we have stated previously, we support code enforcement with criminal penalties where applicable, and we believe it is fair for the city to collect a short-term rental excise tax, and we also are amenable to the short-term rental registration as proposed. Our concern is with the negative impact on private property rights that a cap on days would impose. Lastly, we've heard concerns about transient guests and changing neighborhoods. I think it is important to point out that the owners of these properties, in many cases, are investing tens of thousands of dollars in these communities and therefore contributing to their revitalization. The Columbus way is to be inclusive and welcoming, not to eliminate viable lodging options. We can call on all neighbors to be respectful, responsible property owners. And we remain committed to continuing to work together on this issue. And I thank you, Councilmember Stenziano, for allowing us to speak again tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. I see Councilmember Reaney has joined. Do you have any comments or questions for Mr. Myers? And Council President Shannon Hardin and, again, Councilmember Priscilla Tyson are hanging in the door. I think it's a little cooler over there. Remind everyone, if you can complete a speaker slip, that will be the way for us to know that you are wanting to speak before us this evening. Similar to what we did at Whetstone, I'm going to read the name and then the next person to go, so if that individual could get ready, and that way we can move things along. First up, we have Audra Wheeler from Italian Village, followed by John Lawrence. And again, and I think my colleagues may appreciate this, Councilmember Page has also joined us. She was the one stuck in traffic. If you could keep your comments to 3 minutes for any additional questions, we would appreciate it.
All right, so good evening. My name is Audra Wheeler. I am an Airbnb host. I've been a host since 2011. My property is in Italian Village, and I also have a property in Wineland Park. And I'm here because I love hosting. And I love the experience that I've been able to help others provide to the city. Since 2011, we've had over 500 guests and over 2,000 people stay in our properties. And those people we've had a famous artist from Australia who was brought in by OSU to speak. We had the band, The Big Pink, come and stay, and they played at several venues. We had a woman whose father was about to pass away at one of our hospitals, and she couldn't find a place to stay, so she stayed with us. And we actually have a mom who's bringing her 7 or 8-year-old son to Pride this weekend, his first Pride. So I think that's pretty awesome, and I am getting emotional because these people have been a huge part of my life, and a lot of these people are complete strangers, and my partner is not here. She would be up here crying with me as well. But these 2,000 guests that we've hosted over the years have become part of our family, a lot of them. They come back, They write. My friend Dave Thomas, who is from London, comes back every year, twice a year for 2 weeks. He's the biggest Blue Jackets fan ever. I don't know why, because he has a vision thing and he can't even see the puck. But he loves Columbus, and he sends us birthday cards and holiday cards every time it comes along. So being a host is more than just sitting there collecting money and just watching your bank account grow, or sitting back and watching the neighborhood deteriorate. Our properties are in Italian Village. We also have one in Wineland Park. I am the Italian Village Society president, and everyone in the neighborhood has my contact information. I'm still really good friends with everyone on the street of the original property that I lived in, even though I don't live there anymore. Everyone has my phone number. I'm there at least once a day picking weeds. I've got 5 things of sheets in my car currently as we speak. So I am an extremely hands-on owner, and I love hosting. And it's been a great experience. And the 104-day cap, I think, would just rob a lot of us of that experience and rob a lot of the people visiting our amazing city of experiencing Columbus. I am one of 5 siblings, and my siblings live in cooler cities or cooler locations than Columbus, Ohio. But when I have people come here and I can show them how amazing Columbus is, and they were actually, my family was in town this past weekend for my sister's bridal shower, and they stayed in some of our Airbnbs, and they were like, Columbus is pretty cool. Like, we could see ourselves moving here. And these are people who have lived in San Francisco, who have lived in Portland. My brother's lived in the British Virgin Islands. So to bring people into Columbus and to experience and to say, hey, you want baked goods, Laughlin's is where you're going to go. You want the best egg sandwich, walk over to Fox in the Snow. This is my family. This is part of my community, and I love it. I'm extremely passionate about it. I do understand that there are bad eggs, and I will be the first to help weed those people out because they're not true hosts. They don't have the same passion that we do. Believe me, if there's an incident at my house, I will be pulling up on my baby blue scooter and kicking those people out. They get 3 notices, and then they're done. So let us work with you guys. If you've had bad experiences, I definitely think a lot of these regulations are going to help. But I definitely think don't cut people's experience short in Columbus. So please rethink the 104-day cap. I just think it's going to hurt our community. It's going to hurt our city. And it's going to kill a lot of people's experiences that they could be having in Columbus.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Any questions or comments from my colleagues?
What was her name? Miss Wheeler, I have a question for you, if you wouldn't mind. I know you were quick to sit down. How many properties did you say you had? That you
currently have 3.
Okay.
So one was my primary residence for 8 years. I got married, and my wife didn't like strangers living in the house with us, even though we still love the experience.
Right.
So we built a carriage house, and actually that gentleman is here in the crowd with us as well. So that was on the property. We hosted for 1.5 years with a great experience having guests stay in the carriage house. And then we moved to a neighboring neighborhood trying to have a child. And so our house, 2 properties in Italian Village, and then we have one in Wineland Park.
And if you were to be limited to 104 days, what would that mean to your business?
I don't look at it as a business. I look at it as if that woman called me and said, I can't find a place to stay tonight and my dad is about to pass away and I need to be close to the hospital and this is a last minute thing, and I had to say, I'm sorry, but I've reached my 104-day cap. That, to me, is pretty sucky. So, I mean, it would ruin it if you want to look at it as a business, but as a person, I think that hits me a little bit harder.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Next is John Lawrence, followed by Tina Goodman.
Good evening. My name's John Lorenz. I'm a non-owner occupied Airbnb host. I'll reiterate just really quickly, obviously we're opposed to the 104-day cap. This essentially would be a ban on our business. We believe that this would be a very negative impact on the options within Columbus market for people visiting our city. Certainly support the tax idea, similar to hotel tax. We believe that the tax revenue from non-owner occupied listings will be significant for the city. Believe that the significance of this revenue is currently being severely overlooked. Over the past year, I've personally witnessed the positive impact that non-owner occupied properties have made on our community. For example, a few guests come to mind. A group of Pelotonia riders from Blackberry Farm in Tennessee who needed last-minute housing. This was for Pelotonia in 2017. Multiple families of patients who are in Columbus for treatments at OSU and Nationwide Children's. One who stayed for 6 months with his mother who had an advanced stage of cancer. These folks love our non-owner occupied unit because it really allows for them to have as close to at-home experience as possible. Many families coming from far distances to visit their children at OSU. Multiple families from Asia, for example. These families love staying at our place. They're allowed to cook however they would like. They're allowed to be close with their family. And they experience the true Columbus neighborhoods. Families who are hosting holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, but do not have enough room at their house for the extended family. Startup businesses that are entering the Columbus market and are interested in staying together, but want to save money, obviously. Businesses from all over the globe who are coming to Columbus for events at the convention center. Local families such as Lori, who's actually staying at our house right now. They had a fire at their house and preferred to stay at our listing rather than a hotel. She actually had a couple words that I'd like to share on her behalf. She wasn't able to make it tonight. Airbnb has been the best thing that has happened to us since our house caught on fire. It gave us living arrangements that would have been otherwise unobtainable. I found a place that was available for the remainder of time that our house is being reconstructed. Insurance companies are not easy to work with. It's a really long letter, but my daughter has literally been outside playing since we got here. She has finally been able to make friends again. The neighbors here have made her stay wonderful. Our host has been so helpful and understanding about everything we have needed, even about our dogs. I cannot believe how much everyone has done to make our last couple months displays from our house so wonderful. Just like her, for example, like the fire happened in September of 2017. She stayed at a condo where she said, literally it was in a terrible neighborhood. The breaking point for us was when SWAT blocked my garage one morning because they shot an alleged drug dealer that lived a couple houses down. They stayed in a hotel that they wouldn't clean the room because they had dogs. Like, for her, this is by far the best option that she had. She's been able to stay with her family like for an extended period of time and make it really her house. They've moved a bunch of stuff in, and obviously they've had a great time. As great a time as you can when you're not at your own house. The experience that we provide as non-owner occupied property hosts is really the highest quality in my opinion. We take extreme pride in our city and welcome the guests with recommendations of our favorite local businesses to shop at, visit, and dine at. The guests really love our listings. All right. Last thing I'll say is just personally for me, I have two businesses. One's a fitness studio and one's a transportation business. I quit my corporate job to start those. Without the income that I've had from Airbnb, honestly, I don't think I would have been able to do that. And now employ 20 people in Columbus, and this has been a lifeline to bridge that gap for me personally.
Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Thank you, John. Next up's Tina Goodman, followed by Todd Langley.
Good evening. So I was at the last meeting, and what really stood out to me was what Councilman Hardin said was, what problem are we trying to solve? And the answer was that we were legislating for the future. And so the last meeting we heard from a lot of speakers, or not a lot, but a few that raised issues about things that are happening now in their communities and not talking about issues of the future. I think Columbus, we consider ourselves to be a smart, progressive, and creative city. So I appeal to you to use that creativity to make Columbus a model for the future and a model for other cities to compare to. When we talk about San Francisco and Boston, well, we're not San Francisco and we're not Boston, but maybe we're in Indianapolis, and maybe when Indianapolis looks at legislation, they say, hey, this is how Columbus did it. Columbus compromised and found that middle ground. So about my situation is I own a primary residence and a carriage house. So technically I benefit. I mean, if this legislation passes with that cap, my business goes up, but I don't think it's right because I don't think the legislation is really addressing the problems that we've heard, and it doesn't benefit, the owner-occupied hosts either, where I think we have an opportunity to put together something that benefits non-owner-occupied hosts as well as neighbors. So I would like to have a partner with the city where I know that I'm operating within, the legislation and the law, and that if I did have a problem at one of my properties, I know that I can fall back on that same legislation and that it could help me. I don't think any of the hosts want rowdy parties, we don't want guests, and we don't want to disturb our neighbors. And 99.9% of the people, they're not partiers, they're families. They're coming in for weddings. They're coming in with their grandchildren, and maybe it's a couple in their 60s and adult children. Like that's my bread and butter. And they're great people. I mean, right now I have a family staying at my house. They're here from Baltimore, and it's a mother and her 9-year-old son Jordan who has epilepsy, and he's here picking up his service dog. And so they're here for 2 weeks, and they brought her brother and the child's godmother, and they're all staying in my house. And this isn't something they could have done in their hotel. Her husband's coming in next week. She didn't feel comfortable traveling by herself, and they wanted to be able to have the flexibility to bring the dog in and out of the house. And it's just not something that was feasible, and it's to be able to welcome them and, give them that positive experience on such a life-changing, time for this family it's exciting. 2 years ago I had another woman who was participating in a clinical trial for cancer at Ohio State, and she'd had leukemia 3 times. And this is her 3rd time. She was here for 6 weeks and didn't want to be spending 6 weeks in a hotel. Wanted to be able to have her family come and visit her. And she's full remission, and it was just, these are the people that we're opening our doors to. We're not looking for parties. We're not looking for, to disturb neighbors. We're really looking to, provide a good opportunity to people. So I guess I appeal to you guys to do it smart, do it right, and, make us the model for the rest of the country.
Thank you, Ms. Goodman. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Page.
This may be a question for either Aaron or Ms. Goodman. Could you explain again briefly how this legislation will impact you by renting out the carriage house? Would it be considered secondary?
It's my understanding that it would not affect me because I'm owner-occupied, so I can either stay in the carriage house or the main house, and that's what I do is I flip back and forth between the 2 properties.
But you are still against the cap?
Because I don't think it's right. I think we're shutting down businesses and we're putting people out of business that aren't the problem. You're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and I don't think it helps people. We heard some pretty passionate people last time that spoke about problems, and the cap doesn't really address those problems. It's just a cap, and it's just a piece of legislation to push through, and it doesn't really solve any issues.
And really briefly, sorry, this is my last question. On average, do you know how many days a year you do rent out your carriage house?
I'm probably about 160, right around there.
Thank you.
And to clarify, you would be impacted with the registration component.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the cap, it wouldn't be the impact, but there are additional impacts that would cover all short-term rentals.
Registration, all those things are great. Let's level the playing field, but I like the registration piece because then, and as far as having a number to post, that if there is a problem, someone, 24-hour number, that the property is registered in this format that if there is a party or someone does need to be escorted out, it's not me at midnight. Because, that keeps me up at night. I mean, I'm going to be honest. Like, it's not all, again, mostly perfect, but it's a numbers game, and there's always that one. So to be able to have this legislation to say, hey, this isn't me. Like, we have a law in Columbus that if you have a 2-bedroom house, you can't have more than 5 guests in the house. Something that helps everybody, I'd like to see.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much. Next up, Mr. Langley, followed by Sarah Karakian. I apologize.
Good evening, council members and audience. My name is Todd Langley. I am an Airbnb host. I have 2 non-owner occupied properties. And Aaron, I wanted to say that you did a wonderful job on the presentation. However, like the gentleman over here said, it is full of gloom and doom about short-term rentals. There's nothing positive in there. The fact that long-term rentals, permanent residences, and bed and breakfasts all have the same problems. So I think we need to step it up on some positive facts in there or include everything else with it. Okay. Also, in the proposed regulations here, I am not in favor of the permit for this reason. It says in there the same permit cost for hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, and short-term rentals will be the same. The cost is $95, $20 plus $75. However, as a non-owner occupied property, I am not getting the same benefit of that permit. It's a ban, and I consider that to be illegal for me to have the same permit and not get the same benefits as everybody else. So you need to fix your wording or have a different permit and a lower cost. Other than that, permitting's good. Okay. The other thing I wanted to address is the fact that we have the 90-day thing is really a stickler with me because it was originally a definition, not a ban. Other cities and councils and people have turned this into a 90-day ban or cap on things. So here's what I found from June 1st, 2018. I forget I think it was the Vancouver paper, but it's a group of short-term rental people. 90-day threshold is significant because it's commonly understood to be a point at which it becomes more profitable than long-term renting, and therefore is often used as the threshold to differentiate, this is important, between casual short-term rentals and commercial short-term rentals. It's nothing about non-owner or occupied properties. That's a definition. It was never intended to be a ban, and people have turned it into that. Okay, so also let's just do the math here. I am shocked and surprised that the city council wants to throw away as much money as they're doing by limiting to 104 days. So let's just say the property does $124. The rent is $125 a night. So at your 5.1% tax per bed, that's $637 per night. I average 150 nights, let's say. So that's $955, almost $1,000 that I am paying in taxes for what I do, if I was average. Okay. At the 104 nights, though, I'm now not paying $293. So that's money that you're losing right there for me. Okay, and then let's just say we have 500 non-occupied owners at the 104 days. Then that is $146,510 that we are not collecting in taxes. That's a significant amount of money to do improvements. I can't even get my street paved on Jenkins, and we have, throwing away this kind of money. So if you don't want it, I do. That's all.
Quick question. Do you currently pay the tax?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't.
Next is Sarah Karakian, followed by Jim Kleinman.
All right, you guys, I'm channeling my inner Leslie Knope here. On April 25th, 2018, the New York Post wrote an article titled, "New Yorkers are flocking to this Midwest sanctuary." According to this article, 2,000 New Yorkers and those from the immediate tri-state area moved to Columbus in 2014. My name is Sarah Karakian. My husband Nick and I are among a new crew of New Yorkers who moved to Columbus, Ohio. We actually met at college at Kent State, but we quickly moved to New York City. However, we couldn't ignore the new recent hype. Ohio is changing. Columbus is thriving. We moved here last year, August of 2017. Since then, we purchased a fourplex in Grandview Heights and a cottage in Schumacher Place. We are also responsible, caring, and enthusiastic Airbnb hosts. We have 2 listings. Our hope is to cap out at 3 while balancing the rest of our portfolio with affordable, safe, and updated long-term rentals. Our short time here, we've already teamed up with local makers, craftsmen, designers to join in on transforming these properties while showcasing all of the incredibly talented professionals that live here. Fun fact, 30% of our guests are people who are moving to Columbus. 30%. Not only are they choosing to come to Columbus, but they're choosing to stay in an Airbnb. They're choosing to weave themselves into our neighborhoods. And in our case, they want their own space, their own kitchen, the privacy of a non-homeowner occupied space. Another majority of our guests are students looking for a way to get away from distractions and roommates so they can study. We're hosting 2 students this summer alone who try to reach out to landlords who provide affordable furnished spaces to accommodate their summer schedule to no avail, so they turn to Airbnb. The bill you're proposing says its aim is to balance the well-being and interests of city residents and visitors while still allowing short-term rentals to operate and become a piece of the economic tourism fabric in Columbus. We are disappointed to learn that this bill is also aimed at essentially banning non-homeowner-occupied Airbnbs. As we learned at the last meeting, 0.02% of Columbus's housing market are Airbnbs. I do not believe that we are unbalanced. In fact, when Airbnbs, whether located in homeowner or non-homeowner occupied homes, are run by responsible hosts, we very much add to well-being. We furnish our Airbnbs with furniture found at the Carpenter's Daughter, One More Time, etc., Fresco Furnishings, all amazing consignment stores located on 5th Avenue. We employ a small female-owned cleaning service that meticulously fold our towels and make our beds, just like you find in a hotel, or in my opinion, even better. Our art features that of local makers. You can find every artist business card in our welcome packet that we leave for our guests. Columbus is not New York City. I know that firsthand. We're not San Francisco. We're not Seattle. We're not New Orleans or a vacation hotspot. And their regulations are too recent for us to compare ourselves to. Columbus is, however, a growing city. Did you know that the Midwest is home to 150 Fortune 500 companies, 25% of all U.S. computer science graduates, and 60% of the country's manufacturing base? It's a large market. It makes up 19% of the Americans' GDP. Columbus is a Midwest city that is up for Amazon's new headquarters. It's a city that is attracting new talent so we can keep jobs here, and that new talent depends on options. New talent that makes up 30% of my Airbnb guests. Columbus deserves its own set of Airbnb regulations. I do not believe copying other cities' regulations will help here. Let's put more money into affordable housing development and address the actual reason for the apparent housing shortage. I do want to reiterate, the housing shortage and Columbus's Airbnb listings do not go hand in hand. Trying to conflate the two doesn't serve anyone's best interest. They are separate issues, not one caused by Airbnb. That is what Airbnb does for Columbus. Here's what it does for my small family. It provides us with extra money each month to put back into our fourplex. We live in one unit, have a long-term tenant in another unit, and have 2 Airbnb spaces upstairs. Thanks to our Airbnb, our investment makes sense. The housing market is hot. This fourplex was being run by a slumlord. Plugging in Airbnb numbers versus long-term numbers allowed us to purchase this property, save it from a lackluster landlord, and make desperately needed improvements. We've got too many abandoned homes that are desperate need of repair. There's a housing shortage? Great, happy to help. One thing I want to mention that you didn't talk about yet is the fact that Hyatt has partnered up with another high-end short-term rental platform called Oasis. It's home rentals with Hyatt rewards. Marriott is also exploring its own short-term rentals with local housing. The hotel industry is definitely saying that if they can't beat them, let's join them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For your testimony. That was fast. Jim Kyman, followed by Jack Jenny.
Mike, it's Reinman. You should know that.
There's no, I see.
Good
Thank you,
evening.
Jim.
I'm going to make it under 3 minutes, folks. The hot points are we have one on our street now, and I'll guarantee you, with the real estate people, we'll have another one. My concern, if I was moving into that area and I had small children, I would have no way I'd go someplace else because we don't know who's staying at those facilities. The other thing is in my job and career traveling all over the United States, I stayed in bread and breakfasts. There may be no more than 3 people staying there tonight, and the B&B is owned by a couple or an individual. And last but not least, if we go to this thing, the owner has to be living in the property where these people are living. Thank you.
Jim, any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none. Next, Jack Jenny. 932. Is that followed by Jason Huddle.
Thank you. Good evening. this discussion shouldn't really be about anybody's ability to earn a buck or support the city's economy. There are areas zoned for those purposes. This discussion should be about preserving the integrity of residential neighborhoods. Neighborhoods of mostly owner-occupied residences, long-term renters create stable, safe, and more attractive neighborhoods. Short-term rentals are attracted to these same stable, safe, attractive neighborhoods, many of which are in a desirable location, but without proper regulation, the integrity of those neighborhoods will be undermined. Regulations should allow for short-term rental operation only by primary resident hosts. There should be no accommodation for short-term rentals of secondary residences at all. This is going to really affect the quality of life in Columbus. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? President Hardin?
Just wondering, have you had a negative experience with a short-term rental in or around the neighborhood?
Some of my neighbors have. I personally have not, because I don't have, a bed and breakfast next to me. But I can certainly see how it can spiral out of control.
Are those concerns centered around like noise or what are those concerns that we...
Noise and not knowing who your neighbors are, that they're coming and going. That the ability of a stable neighborhood is to know who your neighbors are, have long-term relations with them, that you can depend on them, to help you out and support each other. Keep an eye on the neighborhood. Yep. Thank you.
Councilmember Remy?
Would you be in favor of banning long-term rentals as well?
No, I would not.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. Next is Jason Huddle, followed by Lisa Craig Morton.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jason Hoddle, and I live in the Livingston Park neighborhood, which is the neighborhood that also houses Children's Hospital. I spent 22 years in banking, and 8 of those years I spent on the road almost every week, all week, in hotels. And when I traveled personally, I chose to stay in Airbnb and other short-term rentals. I found that it gave me being someone who was stuck in hotels for my job, it was a different experience when I went to a city. It gave me an opportunity to meet people, to interact, and to actually learn the culture and fabric of the city. A few years ago, I left that corporate world and started an independent real estate brokerage firm here in Columbus. And part of my ability to do that was selling my house, and I purchased a home from a sheriff's sale. I was the only person to bid on that house in Livingston Park. It had been vacant for many years. After working on that house, I saw another house on the land bank, which had not been purchased at sheriff's sale. Went to the land bank. I subsequently purchased that house. I now own 2 homes in the neighborhood. I'm the president of our civic association. I'm here speaking on behalf of myself, not the civic association. I mention that to indicate that I'm engaged in my community. We have enhanced our community garden. We have engaged long-term rental neighbors, owner neighbors. The entire community is coming together. And I think it's because people are moving in that care about this community that had been neglected and abandoned. Without the opportunity for rental income, I would not have purchased that second property. Based on the long-term rental rates, there would not have been a financial benefit for me to purchase and renovate a property that needed completely gutted and rebuilt from the ground up. So the opportunity to have a short-term rental income, which is larger in many cases than long-term rental income, inspired me to invest in a neighborhood that was otherwise neglected. I feel strongly about, especially in my neighborhood, Nationwide Children's Hospital has a lovely Ronald McDonald House, I believe the largest in the country, but it's often full. Many of my neighbors and friends have short-term rentals, and they're constantly renting to nurses and doctors who are here on assignment for periods of weeks or months. They're continuously renting to families. Many people have mentioned medical reasons throughout this conversation. These are folks that don't want to stay in a hotel or can't afford to stay in a hotel, and this provides them a viable option. So whether it's people who are in those hardship situations that need a comfortable place to stay, or whether it's people who want to learn about our city, I love the opportunity to do that. I'm fully in favor of registration. I'm fully in favor of reasonable taxation. I'm fully in favor of the other controls that can be put in place to ensure that it's a reasonable market. I am not in favor of restrictions on the number of days for owner-occupants, for non-owner occupants, because that makes it a non-viable business option and will eliminate a lot of the opportunity for these short-term rentals in our communities.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Page.
On average, how many days do you rent out to your second property?
We are just finishing the construction on the second one, so I'm not currently renting it. But I purchased it, so this legislation would make several $100,000 investment in this neighborhood go to waste.
Any other questions? Thank you. Lisa has decided to not testify, so next up is Kathy Gerber, followed by Kristen Milnes.
Good evening. As I said, my name is Kathy Gerber, and I represent the neighborhoods, the communities that have dealt with maybe not so conscious hosts as perhaps some of you are here today, which we appreciate your efforts. But when I take a look at this, I'm looking at this from the legislative standpoint. One thing that I think that needs to take a look at is if you look at landlord-tenant law, it regulates residential rentals, but the code does not apply to short-term rentals due to their transient occupancy. I'm not a lawyer here, but I've seen hundreds of contracts during my career, and I advise that you take a look with the city attorneys just to review and make sure that there are no implications of landlord-tenant law as it resides with this legislation. So something to consider. As stated in the legislation, enforcement of these Airbnbs, short-term rentals, will be complaint-driven. I have complained, and usually what happens is you call, the police come, then the residents are gone for the evening. So the timing of this stuff, it happens, and then they're gone, and it's on to the next day, and there's no regularity. Like a long-term rental, you've got that establishment, you've got that routine, and if there's issues with long-term rentals, those get addressed because it's a long-term. With the short-term rentals, we're talking about, overnight, over a couple nights, and these people are in and out. So one of the things, I have a couple of recommendations to consider with the legislation, and I know we've talked about some of this in the past, is to set up a unique reporting system in the 311 system to specifically track problems associated with any short-term rentals. Another option here is to publish the short-term rental permit numbers on the auditor's website that directly associated with the short-term rental property. If this isn't appropriate or feasible, perhaps another website available to the public that includes information about the property, the owner, responsible parties to contact, information and phone number. And related to this, I know all of you here are talking about being here within the city. It's going to happen where we have people, actually the Airbnb next to us, they don't reside in Columbus proper. They reside up in Riverly, up in Worthington. So I think we have to consider what are we going to do about people that have short-term rentals, but they're not in the city or an adjacent city location, whether it be, from an investor from the West Coast. What are we going to do with those folks? And I think somebody referenced Marriott. that was one thing when we first kind of were having these discussions, is what is to prevent Marriott or any other of these big chains to come in and purchase houses and rent them out as short-term rentals. And they could take a whole neighborhood and make these short-term rentals. So something, again, to consider when we're looking at the legislation.
3 minutes, including remarks.
Okay. Let's see. Impact of housing prices due to short-term rentals. We're looking at this, and actually on Realty Times, they actually indicated that many realtors feel that single-family home or condo units next door to a short-term rental will take longer to sell and bring in lower offers. Again, there's no background.
Thank you very much. And after...
Boston yesterday just approved a ban on investor short-term rentals. City Council voted 11-2 on that. Thank you.
Kristen Milnes, followed by Scott Gerber.
Good evening, thank you. I am an Airbnb host and have been since 2013. Previously, I worked in hotel management, and so I was actually living in Florida and bought a property up here thinking I could just collect rent. I bought it on Parsons, thinking long-term because of the proximity to the hospital and how the borders of German Village were kind of changing, and it seemed to be an area that people wanted to be in. The reality is that I have lived in Columbus since 2013. Airbnb has been wonderful for me. I took a building that it was basically held up by cockroaches and rat infestation. It had 5 of the 6 units had drug dealers. All 6 units had violent offenders. It was something that I've poured my blood, my sweat, my tears, so many tears, into. And in trying to make it a place that was just clean and comfortable, not even fancy, I was unable to get it rented. I thought, I'll rent to people who work at the hospital, I'll rent it to people who, want to be in the area and are just starting out. And the fact is, at the time, and even still currently, though there's lots of change in the neighborhood, my 6-unit apartment building just can't be sustained by long-term rentals. That's a sad fact. That's always been the goal. So Airbnb for me has been a godsend. I lived in the building initially, and over the past couple of years have been able to buy a home. So I have 3 that I rent long-term and 3 that I rent on Airbnb. I've had amazing people come through. Right now I have a family that their daughter is 4 and is here. They're here for the month while she has treatment at the hospital. So it allows their family a place to stay, to be together, to cook, and get away from the hassles of the hospital. Previously, they stayed at the Ronald McDonald House. When Uber was getting started here in Columbus, the gentleman stayed at one of my units. I've had people here for the fair, people here for the Arnold, people here for extended periods of time. Personally, I don't rent to anybody shorter than a week for turnover. While it's been a good revenue stream for me, I will tell you it's a lot more labor intensive to make sure that I can get the apartments cleaned thoroughly because people don't always leave them nicely, to keep them in good repair, to keep everything up. It takes a lot more work, a lot more dedication, and it's something that I look forward to providing so that people have a clean, safe place to stay in Columbus. I'm always upfront when being in contact with people, telling them about the area. It's an area that's in transition, it's a bit urban, don't keep things in your cars. I'm always upfront because I never want anybody to be caught unawares. And for the most part, people don't have a problem. That is the only thing I get dinged on, though, is the location. But you can only do so much. The 104-day cap would be a real kick in the pants, and not in a good way. That would essentially take, okay, that would take 3 units away from me that right now I'm not able to get rented on a long-term basis. So I will just say I'm active in the community. I'm on the PAMA board, although this is not PAMA sanctioned. I mean, just to show that I'm an active member.
Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Page.
Question multiple times, but I'm just trying to get an idea of how, on average, how often you're renting out your unit on a yearly basis. So you don't like the 104, so how many days a year are you renting it out?
I have them rented about, I'd say 70% of the time. Sometimes I don't have anybody, like the winter months are totally dead. I won't have anybody there December, January, February. So it's the rest of the year. Sometimes I'll have somebody there for 2 months, and sometimes it's just 1 week a month. So, but on average, I'd say it's rented about 70%. Thank you. 250 days.
And is that so you have 3 units that you rent out for the short term or using Airbnb?
Yes.
So each of those 3 units about 70% of the time, or you're just saying generally all 3 units are occupied about 70% of the time?
Each unit is probably 60 to 70%. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Nope. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Gerber, followed by Edgar Manosalva.
Hello, my name is Scott Gerber. We're 30-year residents of the city. We live up near, in the northwest side of Columbus, near St. Tim's. And we have an Airbnb next door, and it hasn't been a good experience. The distance from us, from our bedroom window, is from here to the corner of that table. And if you've gone to a motel before, you understand what to expect from an Airbnb motel. For our situation, we have the car doors slam, we have the fobs, we have talking outdoors at night. So in a sense, we're part of the motel as well. Not acceptable. So in addition to just the noise, you also have the stranger issues, which the gentleman pointed out in the back, is that we don't really know, our neighborhood's pretty quiet. We don't know really who's here, who's there, are there a strange car? So it's a situation that I guess I'm really disappointed with the Columbus Board of Realtors, in that you would think that the thing that would be most important to them would be maintaining kind of the sanctuary of the quality of the neighborhood. I'm sure they're not going in selling a house and saying, hey, you have an Airbnb next door. But that should absolutely, and I'm talking primarily to you, Councilmember Remy, is that should absolutely be part of the MLS listing, is that there is an Airbnb next door, or that you're selling an Airbnb. Because again, if you're an individual, you are not going to want to purchase that type of property. Another thing is that this feels, it kind of has that whole quick get rich quick scheme feel to it. You have people who are buying multiple properties, they're investors, they're hoping to make hopefully a quick buck or two. If not, they might go ahead and get rid of it on a long-term market. And right now we're in the strongest economy ever. How many times, if you currently have a room or a house that you're renting, is there 1 on your block? What are you going to do when there's 5 on your block or 10 on your block? I don't think Airbnb has any type of restrictions where they give you any type of well, we're not going to allow any more than just X number. Marriott, kind of getting that whole economy thing going. Marriott was a year ago. Currently it's $139 in stock price. During the depth of the recession, it was 13. So what are you going to do when there's people not coming into the property? One other thing, I'm a geek guy. So if you're a geek, you have to have a website. And that's what I've created to try to help monitor some of these situations. So what this is going to do is this is going to help neighborhoods, and it's a prototype right now, but it's going to help neighborhoods monitor the properties. It's going to allow people who reside in neighborhoods to have sort of their own talking points. You've heard a lot of talking points from the hosts today. This will allow us to kind of present our property or our ideas, and it's going to have more, it's going to get rid of some of the anonymity that's currently associated with these properties, so that you'll know.
We've reached our 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gruber.
So that you know what's going on.
Questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, next is Edgar Manosalva, followed by Nate Kaplan.
Good evening. My name is Edgar Manosalva. I'm here with my partner, Sophia. We run a single-family Airbnb outside of Upper Arlington. We also live 5 houses away from a long-term rental turned short-term rental on Deer Creek Drive, who made the news recently. And so I have an experience of having both. This one house has been long-term residence rentals every 6 months, once a year, and recently turned Airbnb. I guess my answer to that is the owner is not really invested in the neighborhood. That's the big thing I think that we bring to the neighborhood. Our neighbors are friends. They watch out for the property. They give us any insight on our guests, and we encourage that. So the 104-day limit, again, we've heard enough of it, but basically I think if we had a 104-day limit, we'd have to sell it. Just get rid of it, do whatever. I think you've asked a couple of times how often. We're looking at about 160 days for this year. And I think that's fair. We're not making money. It's not get rich quick by any means. I think we're talking that maybe if we got a part-time job, we could make more money at the end of the year with the hours we put into this property. We'd love to see 50% occupancy. I think a lot of people probably wish they could get that too. It's hard to do that. A lot of it is weekends, some long weekends, so we're not getting the we're not going to get 360 days occupancy, that's for sure. So I also I guess the other thing I wanted to bring up was, what is the purpose of this? I know, again, like my neighbor who runs the Airbnb, I'd rather he didn't. I'd rather he didn't rent it at all. I'd love to see a family move in and so forth, but he's not a good host. The house is in disrepair, excuse me. It's just not good for the neighborhood. Regardless of what he's doing, he is the owner. But bad operators, I mean, I'm guessing from looking at his house, we don't see a lot of traffic, so he's probably going to have to sell it or go back to long-term rentals. The makeshift hotel kind of thing, thoughts on that? Maybe we can limit the number of rentals per unit, maybe number of bathrooms. I don't know what like a regular B&B kind of atmosphere. You can only have so many rentals, not necessarily guests. We try to do our house is listed as 6 guests, but it's 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths, and 8, basically room for 8 people. So, but we limit it, we say 6 people. If people want to go in there, we have an upcharge for any additional thing. So we get great guests, really awesome stories, and I think that's part of it. We do enjoy that. We enjoy those testimonies of people. We have a guest book, and they leave some of the greatest things that are really cool. I think, yeah, just the last one. We had a military family for Thanksgiving that their mom lived in a 1-bedroom apartment here in town. An opportunity to get together, 6 of them. It was great. It was awesome. So we appreciate maybe if we're going to have a limit, that maybe it's not 104 days, maybe half the year, something to that effect. And I think that would probably encompass most of us in a safe way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, Nate Kaplan, followed by Judy Box.
I'd like to thank council and everyone for participating. My name is Nate Kaplan. I'm a real estate broker specializing in urban residential properties downtown and in surrounding neighborhoods like the Short North and here in German Village. My website's called columbuslofts.com. My clients are a mix of buyers and renters, sellers and investors alike. I'm a member of the boards of a few HOAs downtown where I own units. I do support registration, safety and health legislation, anti-discrimination rules, taxes, and the rights of HOAs to regulate rentals through their governing documents. I personally own about 20 properties throughout the area, some that I lease long-term and some short-term, including on Airbnb. And I manage properties belonging to clients, including some on Airbnb. I'm a real estate professional, an investor, and a responsible landlord who takes great pride in and care of my properties and those that I manage for my clients. To disparage me and those like me by proposing legislation that presumes non-owner occupied short-term rentals are a scourge on neighborhoods and should be constructively banned by way of a 104-day limit is offensive in the extreme. And it's also an assault on basic property rights. I'd like to make a few points about the proposed legislation. One, the city has offered no evidence of a difference in outcomes between full-time occupant versus non-occupant hosts of short-time rentals. Only conjecture, innuendo, and a handful of anecdotes from aggrieved neighbors of a minuscule number of rental properties in the entire city. Where's the data? What evidence is there that limiting non-occupant hosts to renting 104 days will result in fewer complaints? Isn't it equally logical to assume that full-time occupant-hosted rentals, in which an occupant is basically running a rooming and boarding house, create far more risks for both the guests and the hosts due to the co-living among strangers? Isn't it also obvious that if you set a limit that allows hosts to rent every weekend but no more, it would incentivize them to concentrate on more profitable 1- and 2-day weekend rentals rather than lower-priced, longer-term weekday rentals, increasing the likelihood of such rentals being done for parties and events that could lead to even more nuisance complaints? 2, the proposed legislation recognizes only 2 types of hosts: full-time occupants and non-occupant owners. What about real estate brokers like me who professionally manage properties for investor owners? I hope this is just an oversight, as Ohio law, of course, provides that real estate brokers may manage residential properties for owners. Such arrangements should in fact be preferred by any legislation the city enacts, because as real estate professionals, we are educated, licensed, experienced, and held to high standards under the law when it comes to how we handle our properties under management and how we interact with tenants who rent those properties, including fair housing law. The Gerbers brought up, what about out-of-state landlords of these properties? Pass legislation to require out-of-city or out-of-state landlords to hire professional real estate brokers to manage their short-term rentals. 3, I only have one more thing. We should recognize that there are differences among neighborhoods as well as housing types throughout the city, both in terms of demand for these things, as well as the expectations of neighbors, such as suburban and urban neighborhoods. As some other cities have done when they enacted legislation for short-term rentals, I think it would make sense for Columbus to draw a line between these different sets of expectations in certain areas and exempt certain areas, such as the downtown district and surrounding neighborhoods, as well as multifamily housing, from restrictions. Certainly neighbors on High Street downtown or in the short north cannot reasonably argue that, but for the short-term rental in the high-rise next door, they would otherwise enjoy peace and quiet. Finally, to sum it up, it seems as though this case is a case of legislation.
Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Thank you.
Using a
Thank you,
sledgehammer
Nate.
to chase a fly through
Judy
your kitchen.
Box, followed by Gary Stufoff.
Excuse me being overdressed, but we're off to a ding. Bruce and I just came back from Holland, and Amsterdam has been decimated by Airbnb. And just briefly, they have 800,000 residents and 8 million tourists. And the only way the city could control that was by limiting the number of hotels they approved. Airbnb came in and citizens turned their houses over for Airbnb and either sold them to people who wanted to run Airbnb, or they kept running it as Airbnb, and they've moved way out of town. It's decimated the core of Amsterdam. And I suspect that's been happening in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and other high tourist places. This is not those cities. We are not a high tourist place. And the testimony we've had today from the people who have 1, 2, and 3, and I noticed that was a pattern. I haven't heard anyone say they have more than 3. I'm sure there are people in the room who do. I don't see why we can't limit it to 3 or 5. Pick a number. We don't have to, we're trying to be Amsterdam and we're not. That's my only comment. When you make 104 days, you're putting people out of business, and I don't know that that's necessary.
Any questions or comments? So, Judy, I got a quick question for you. So one of the issues that comes up is that properties are zoned residential, and you use putting them out of business. So how should we consider what's a business versus a residential area?
Well, if I rent a house full-time, which I do, I've had as many as 40 rentals, and by the way, I'm a real estate broker too, and an MD and a few other stripes. It's a residential neighborhood, and if I want to rent, I've got a little church in my backyard, and this is whistling. Your legislation isn't going to affect me at all, except if there's a limit on the number of Airbnbs, and I'm really spooked by the corporate stuff. When people are building an apartment building and having half of it Airbnb, that's not the nature of these things. If you limit all of that, then my income will go back up again. It's come down enough this year compared with last year. I'm thinking of stopping doing it and just renting it long term. I share the stories and the heartaches and all the rest of it. I've got my own stories like that. I think that's a value that people can't get anywhere else. And to shut that down. So anyway, to answer your question, if my little church is a residence being rented to a tenant full time versus an Airbnb, I think it's still a residence. And by the way, the only problem I've been doing this a year and a half, the only problem I've had with a tenant was one guy who complained and really dinged me down to 1 star because he saw ants that nobody else could find and he didn't like the yellow color on my walls. You know, I'm sorry. Everybody else has thought it's wonderful. The family that comes, grandma's in a nursing home and they come for Thanksgiving. They can fix Thanksgiving dinner in my Airbnb and bring grandma. They can't do that in the nursing home. I got lots of those sort of stories. I think it's residential just like other residential.
Councilmember Remy?
Judy, one moment. In your experience, do you feel that the typical guest at your properties is the same guest that would come to Columbus to stay at a hotel, or do you think it's a different set of people?
Well, for example, last year I had a couple from China come for the Arnold, and she was the weightlifter, by the way, a little Chinese woman. She was pretty hip. They wanted the Airbnb because they wanted the kitchen. The family I mentioned for Thanksgiving wanted the kitchen. Recently, we're bringing grandmother in, and my grandmother's a severe diabetic, and it's hard to eat in restaurants. So I think the fact that I have a full-service kitchen and a washer and dryer is probably half my people. And I get a lot of people come for a month, a doctor coming to start work at Lower Lights, a professor coming to work at OSU. They don't want to be a month in a hotel. I'd bet it's 50-50. And I don't know what they'd do if they didn't have my option, because they really don't want to stay in a hotel.
Any other questions? Thank you, Judy. Next is Gary Stufoth, followed by Hannah Brame.
I'm Gary Stufoth, and based on testimony I heard at the previous hearing and other reading and research I've done, I think short-term rentals where you have, responsible hosts, where the rentals are used primarily for lodging, where hosts don't allow parties, and especially where the hosts live maybe next door or in the immediate neighborhood, I don't really see those as causing a problem, on my street. But my situation is different than that. I live across the street from a short-term rental with hosts that live out of state, and the main reason people rent this house isn't for the lodging, it's because they want a big space to have their party. And, let's just say that's the exception. That's not typical of short-term rentals in Columbus at all. But you can't, dismiss that kind of situation. At the previous hearing, a number of hosts testified that things like loud noise, like parking congestion, like lots of people coming and going, and loud, middle of the night, mass departures, that's just part of, you'd find that in any neighborhood you go to, that's just part of life in the city. Well, I want to tell you, council people, that, that's not true. When the house across the street from me was an owner-occupied residence, those things didn't happen in my neighborhood. It's not just the way things are, and it's certainly not the way, just things are, weekend after weekend after weekend. Now, you can't address this kind of situation through the complaint mechanisms that the hosting platforms have, because, well, those are useless. You can't address this kind of situation through good neighbor agreements, because good neighbor agreements are just they're like a feel-good salve you can rub on a problem. You know, they're never included in a legally enforceable document. There are never any consequences, and when things start to slide, as they always do, you know, it's back on the neighbors to police that, and you know, there you are all over again. The proposed regulations, as they stand now, they're really silent on this issue. They do not include a mechanism, and I think they should, so that a neighbor who has, you know, a legitimate ongoing grievance related to the operation of a short-term rental can provide evidence and documentation to the city, and then the city will have that, and I would think that they would want to, you know, consider that when that permit's up for renewal. You know, maybe the permit shouldn't be renewed, maybe the city should require changes before the permit is renewed. Right now, the proposed regulations only address illegal activities, you know, prostitution, drugs, gangs, police and fire calls. Well, the things I'm talking about, they're not illegal, but they sure can have a negative impact on the quality of life on my street, on your street, on anybody's street. So I say, I'm not anti short-term rental. You know, they become part of vibrant, thriving cities, and I want to live in one of those. But I think you got to put a mechanism to let people provide you information on legitimate, ongoing grievances associated with the operation of short-term rental.
Thank you, Gary. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, Hannah Brame, followed by Matt Adair.
Hello, my name is Hannah Brame. I am not an owner-occupied. I rent the place where I live, and I also have a spare room that I use for Airbnb. I'm going to try to speak loud so that you guys in the back can hear me. Thank you guys for having this forum. I think this is really beneficial. What was beneficial to me today listening to people is that the things that I thought were going to be concerns don't seem to be the concerns. Initially, I was resistant to the regulation. I agree that some of the taxes are going to be beneficial probably to the city. But I echo what other people have said. I'm not sure what the purpose of this is. I was hoping I could get you guys to raise your hands. Everyone who's an Airbnb host, can you raise your hand? Are there anyone here who own a hotel or a motel? No. And who is here because they were wanting to make a complaint because they don't like Airbnb? So it seems to me that there is a minority of people who seem to be pushing this legislation, which is going to actually detract from the community in Columbus. I think that there are situations where if Airbnbs were not available, people would not come to Columbus. If you imagine all of the properties around nationwide and you limited each one of those to 104 nights, there would be nurses on rotation that would run out of a place to stay. I would also like to say that I'm surprised at some of the comments I've heard, which are not, I was offended, partly because I don't live in a neighborhood where people call the police when someone is being loud, because usually other people are being loud, and I wish that they would be quiet. I run an Airbnb near campus. Our Airbnb guests complain to us about the students. I now have an Airbnb close to Parsons. The people on Parsons don't complain about the Airbnb. Our guests come to us concerned about vagrants in the alleyway. So I think there's a really different perspective depending on what neighborhood you live in, and I think that's a little bit unfair. I wanted to keep it quick, and I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Matt Adair, followed by Anthony Jones.
Hi, I'm Matthew Adair. Can you hear me, I think? Okay, I'm just going to read this instead of rambling. Short-term rentals transform residential neighborhoods into hidden hotel districts with little oversight. The short-term rentals remove viable rental units from the market and exacerbate affordable housing crises, especially in neighborhoods like Wineland Park, where I've lived for 7 years, where I know of 4 new Airbnb units taking advantage of the changed landscape. While market prices rise and some families are forced to move, Airbnb owners are patting their pockets off the newfound authenticity and desirability of our neighborhood. Property owners find the short-term rental circumstance more lucrative because potential profits exceed the fair market monthly rent, as we've heard, and owners don't have to deal with those pesky tenants' rights. They turn neighborhoods into entertainment districts and disregard the rights of long-term residents who did not choose to buy property adjacent to revolving rooming houses. Many owners are portraying themselves as true heroes for operating profit-driven enterprises. This is simply a distraction from the negative impacts the units have on the neighborhood quality of life and affordability. No host wants to see themselves as part of a larger problem. They don't think they're contributing to macro-level social issues like housing cost burden and displacement. They're innocent. Some people are touting Airbnb as a marker of Columbus's newfound coolness. While they worry that regulation might decrease the stature of our city in the eyes of others, people are literally going homeless and doubling up in subpar rental units due to the housing crisis. One person mentioned that a building she bought had violent offenders. Where do you want restored citizens to live? Do you want to quarantine them in a certain neighborhood of your choosing? People that have been in the criminal justice system deserve a home. They paid their debt in prison, and it's very surprising to me that you said that you're not able to find long-term renters when we have a serious housing shortage. That's very difficult to believe. In regards to this legislation, I think short-term rentals should be publicly visible from the street, not hidden, and the penalty for violating the registration rules should be increased, as well as the permit fees. Somebody complained about you're going to make $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year, and you're complaining about $120 for a permit. That's absurd. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Matt. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none. Thank you. Mr. Jones, followed by Amy Ivankoff.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Jones. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak here this evening. I know it's hot in here. I was in the last event over there at Whetstone. I appreciate the chance of getting all this feedback. I am an owner-occupied short-term rental host. My wife and I own a duplex in Clintonville. We had it initially leased under the long-term rental format. Then we were having a hard time actually finding somebody to accommodate that use of the site. So we turned to Airbnb, and we made a significant investment. It was close to $15,000 on a property that we've already been able to rent out. It was already there. We just had to make it nice enough to get the people we wanted to go there. So from that standpoint, a cap on the number of days would have made me not do that. I wouldn't have saw the investment return as an option. I would have kept it as a long-term rental. So that cap would have had me choose a different route of going for my property. And I live in a duplex, so my neighbors expect it not to be a solely owner-occupied residence. They expect people to turn over from time to time. So a short-term rental in that instance, in my situation, does not have, in my opinion, a negative impact on the neighborhood character. To the contrary, people come to stay at my place because of my neighborhood. They like walking half a block to the Kroger's or going to get ice cream at Witt's down the street. They are enjoying the atmosphere of where they can take their family. A majority of our guests are families. They're husbands and wives and their 2 or 3 kids. They don't want to go in a hotel room because they don't have the necessary child sleeping devices. They don't have the ability to wash clothes. They don't have the ability to make their own meal. So we're seeing a lot of families come to our neighborhood, and they absolutely love it. We had a visitor from Australia. We had actually someone coming from France staying 1 month because their surrogate is having a child for them. So it's that sort of experience that they're not going to stay at a hotel for 1 month with all the expenses that would incur having to eat out and do all the things you would do in your normal life for 1 month. I think from my standpoint, if the neighborhood character issue the gentleman raised previously about if your neighbor is being disruptive, if there are impacts to the community, the grounds for denial section of the legislation should be able to be modified to be more accommodating of that neighborhood character in those short-term rentals. Because right now, the grounds for denial is based solely upon hotels. It's just added short-term rental language into that section of the code. If it were to be reviewed and looked at a little closer, we can actually have the calls for service ratio be a means to actually eliminate the cap on short-term rentals, have it be all year long, and have it be more restrictive to get out those bad actors who have continual complaints, who I think no one in this room wants to see in their neighborhood. So there's ways, I think, to get to that, but not under the current proposed language that's here right now. And for me, I think this Airbnb has actually caused us to invest more time and energy into our property. Every single week, every single day, we're cleaning, looking at things, and we're about 90% occupied so far. And we just started in the beginning of March, so I think we're doing pretty well so far, and I thank you for your time here this evening. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Any questions or comments? Next up is Amy Ivankoff, followed by David Roy.
Hi. Am I tall enough? Okay. No, there weren't 2 minutes. I am a long-term resident of this area. I live 2 blocks east of here, have for the past 45 years. I'm a homeowner. Someone asked about how many rental properties. On my single block of 6 houses, there are 2 single houses. The rest are rentals. In my area, there's a plethora of rentals. We have no problem with the rentals that people are living close to us or in our area are taking care of, are owning. We've got a new Airbnb in our neighborhood that is not, no serious issues yet, but it is not contributing to the fabric of our community. Not. We don't know those people. They're in, they're out. Their trash is on the curb, waiting to be picked up. But they are not, the long term, they're not contributing. And the long-term people who own rental properties who do not live in our neighborhood, our neighbors to the north, Worthington, Arlington, Dublin, New Albany, etc., their tenants are afraid to tell them that something's wrong with their property for fear that their rent's going to be escalated. So we, in our area, live with things like gutters and downspouts hanging for 7 and 8 and 9 years, toilets in the backyard, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a nice neighborhood, folks. Slates falling off the roofs, but the tenants are afraid to call for fear of their rent being jacked up. You know, this is not good. It's not contributing to Columbus, Ohio, overall. That's it.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, David Roy, followed by Scott Weaver.
Hey, folks. I came unprepared. My wife and I actually moved up here 8 months ago. We had a business in Florida that had a division up here, and we fell in love with Columbus. I'm originally from Boston, and what a cool city that you can actually afford. And sold everything, moved up here, been looking for a place, and we finally found, we're empty nesters, 3 kids, and found a condo on Gay Street right where we wanted to be. And one thing we looked at when we were buying is, okay, what's the rent to ownership ratio in the building? Because that does affect your resale cost. And one thing we liked in the bylaws was that there was no short-term rentals. I have nothing against Airbnb. I use it all the time when I travel around the country, but it's my choice to not buy a piece of property in a 54-unit condo where we have security and doors and fobs that suddenly you're giving a key to someone I don't have a clue on, and there goes all my security and parking garage and everything else. I mean, don't get me wrong. I chose to live in a building like this. Well, we just had a board meeting 2 weeks ago, and we wanted to address that because our daughter came to visit for Mother's Day, and she says, oh, I'll just find an Airbnb. She goes, you know, you have 2 in your building. And we're like, we can't. It says in our bylaws, no short-term rentals. Well, we went to the board member, they elect new board members, and the last board members were all residents. Now all 4 are investors that do not live on the property. So now we don't even have a word in our own building. Okay, which to me is like, this is not what I bought. And like I said, this has nothing against Airbnb. What about my rights? I just spent $250,000 on a condo, and now I don't have control of who's coming in and out of the building. Okay, as far as transients, that's what they are. I mean, when you stay in for 1, 2, 3 days, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a good Airbnb tenant too, okay? But I chose a building that had it in the bylaws, but yet investors are renting out as Airbnb. Investors have taken over the board, and I asked, what can we do about it? And they said, you have to take the board members to court to change it. Well, hello, this is fixed, guys. You know, all right? So I don't have the money to take the board members to court. So I just feel like I've been bamboozled, basically, going, wait a minute, I looked for 2.5 years for a place to stay, and now it's kind of like this is not what's in our bylaws. So that's just from a different standpoint. Someone who uses Airbnb, but I chose to say where I live, but you're not giving me the choice. You're not. You're coming in and saying, we're renting, that's it, too bad, which is kind of upsetting. Thanks.
Any questions or comments? Scott Weaver, followed by Bernard Wilburn.
Thanks to the members of the council for being able to speak today. Scott Weaver, 13-year resident of Italian Village.
I've been a host on Airbnb for about a half a year now, had great experience with it for both myself and my guests, very positive reviews. I rent out a guest unit behind my house. I spent about $60,000 with anticipation of putting it on Airbnb, both for use of guests as well as personal use when I have family and friends in from out of town. A small business was effectively created in the local community. I have a great number of people come in, enjoy the area, enjoy the short north, have close commutes to either downtown, OSU, the convention center, nationwide, etc. And because of that, they're spending money locally. They're spending money in the local community. I've never had any issues with my guests. I've had more issues in the past with long-term renters in the area, or in one case with squatters next door who, under Columbus statute, were unable to get evicted because the police did not have access to that property without a proper owner when it was going under foreclosure. So I'm really here today to talk about what's the issue we're trying to solve. And I think a lot of good issues have been raised today in terms of, the questions raised in terms of what that problem is. I'm all for registration, I'm all for permitting, all for responsible hosts, but this is a very blunt instrument that's being used across a very broad spectrum of Columbus. Columbus is a very diverse city. There's a number of very diverse neighborhoods. Every neighborhood is different, and you get that community fabric because of that neighborhood. As the last speaker addressed, he's got a localized issue. This is an issue that's best addressed with neighborhood associations, with homeowners associations. This isn't a Columbus issue. This is a local issue. If local residents get together, group, decide there's additional dialogue they want to have around the issue, I'm all for that. I'm all for the registration. I'm all for additional taxes. But I made a conscious business decision to put my property on Airbnb. I live in the front of it. I have people in and out all the time. That's an issue for me and my neighbors that we deal with. And it's been great so far. But I'm not in favor of additional regulations, even though that I wouldn't be affected by that night cap. Setting an arbitrary number only portrays that there could be future regulations that are even more restrictive. I like the advice about limiting the number of properties that can be under a single host. That might help alleviate some of those concerns about the long-term investment, investors coming in from out of city. The other thing is you're basically taking away a property right for investors at this point. I've heard no discussion this far about grandfathering rights. That would seem to make a lot of sense as people have invested in these properties to date. Why, if we're worried about the future, what could come, why don't we grandfather in what's already there? So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, Bernard Wilburn, followed by Jody Benton.
Good evening. My name is Bernard Wilburn. I'm a 40-year resident of the Short North. I am an Airbnb operator. I would like to say, first of all, that short-term rental operators offer something in the lodging market that is not offered anywhere else. We offer a home. It is often that I've heard a lot of testimony tonight about the fact that it's families who come, whether those are families with kids, whether they're families, couples. I have a lot of people who come strictly for the ability to be able to use a kitchen. I had recently a couple come in for 6 days for an educational conference. They came with dietary issues that could only be addressed by being able to cook for themselves. So there are things that we offer that are simply not available in hotels. And I thank City Council for recognizing that and sort of embracing the STR model, the short-term rental model. It's here to stay. It's a little bit like Uber. It's not going away. So you have in this city a group of people who are really concerned and are responsible and are people who care about things going well. No one wants horror stories. No one wants all-night parties. No one wants to upset their neighbors. And I think that you've seen what this group, the Hosts Alliance, has been able to, in cooperation with the idea of being reasonably restricted or reasonably regulated, have offered in terms of ideas. Take advantage of that. We appreciate the fact that you've had this dialogue with that organization and all of us, and that you seem to be taking many of those suggestions to heart. I'm going to join so many others tonight and say that the 104 night cap is effectively a ban of virtually, I don't know what the numbers are, but I think it's close to half of the people who are doing this out there. And I think that it's draconian, and I think that it's a little bit arbitrary. Granted, we all have to draw lines. Maybe the lines shouldn't be drawn at the point of the number of nights, but perhaps they should be drawn on lines of how big a business is this? You know, if it gets to be something that is truly commercial, then perhaps it ought to be regulated in the way that commercial rooms, people who offer commercial rooms, hotels, are regulated. You know, if it's something less than that, and don't ask me what that number is it 3 units? Is it 5? Is it 10? I don't know. Is it units that are within, you know, the same block, half a mile, 3 miles? I'm not sure. And I'm glad that I'm not sitting where you guys are to have to make those kinds of decisions. But I think something like that makes more sense than the arbitrariness of a 104-day cap, which is effectively, you've heard it before, it's a ban. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's fair. I think it improperly regulates property rights or limits them. I think there are all kinds of problems with it. So I think there's a way to do this. I'm not sure that the 104-night cap is the way. Thank you very much.
I do have a follow-up question. Any questions or comments? So, as Aaron mentioned, though, many cities have used 90 days. Airbnb thrives in those cities as well. They aren't going away. So how do you correlate when there's 90 days in other cities and it's able to exist and to succeed versus what makes Columbus so much different that a cap is all of a sudden going to eliminate that?
What I would say is that if you're operating in the home that you're residing in, I think that you can probably actually do a little better. It's less expensive to run than if you're doing it a little further away. Okay, but even if we were limited to 104, I wouldn't be able to do it. I still wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm not quite sure how Airbnb is thriving in those cities. And the thing is this, you know, it is a unique offering. If you want to keep Columbus offering a complete and dynamic and multifaceted environment for people to come, which is, I think, what the city would like to see. I think that, you know, I would continue encouraging us by regulating us reasonably, but not overburdening us.
Thanks so much. Next is Jody Benton, followed by Michael Taylor.
Good evening. Thank you for listening. I believe today is my 2-year anniversary of being an Airbnb host. I live in my property. I have 3 listings in that property. They're all single room rentals. I can accommodate up to 5 people a night. I have had over 500 guests. My husband is a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran who's disabled. He cooks a full breakfast for almost all of our guests. They get a 25% discount if they stay a month. I've had over a dozen people stay over a month and move to Columbus. I had a 2.5-month person from New Zealand. As far as not contributing to the fabric of Columbus, you've got to be kidding me. When a person comes to study at OSU and they're getting their PhD as an eye surgeon, how are they not contributing by going to school here and by living here and by eating here and by getting some sort of certification from here? I don't understand that comment that they're not contributing. I don't care if they're coming to see the Blue Jackets from Cincinnati, they're contributing. I don't believe in any regulation, and I'll tell you why. Half of the people who stay with me are traveling from Oklahoma or St. Louis or California on their way to the East Coast or vice versa. And they can just as easily go right down the road to Dayton, or they can just go on to Pittsburgh. And nobody needs to stop them and pay a higher $15 per night tax to stay in Columbus, Ohio. I just had this happen. I'm from March the 2nd, the Arnold, till October 31st, I'm almost 100% booked. After that, you can hear the crickets chirp. But I did this last Christmas. I had 2 people rent 2 rooms for a month from Malaysia. They were here representing the Japanese Times. You can't find a good place to stay for a month other than our facilities, I believe. Also, I have people who are third shift workers who want to sleep all day. You also can't sleep all day in a motel without paying double. So I also don't believe in regulating the city, because then that puts me at an adverse. There's 385 rentals to my knowledge, somewhere take or less, whoever turns on or off their app. I have to compete with Canal Winchester, all of the suburbs. Your regulations won't affect them. So then I who also live on the south side, and I do get dinged for my location also. I run a very beautiful house. I have really great reviews. But I'm going to be now adversely competing. You might as well just put me out of business. I will not be able to get, I'm already at the lowest end. I don't understand also why every single business, I have bad neighbors who own their homes. They don't take care of their dogs, they don't clean their yards, they don't pick up their garbage, they don't get rid of their used vehicles. And I get nowhere calling. We have that in every aspect of our life, with churchgoers, with motel owners who have the. You cannot regulate character or personal behavior, and I don't understand how people think they're going to make better neighbors with regulations.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? The last speaker slip we have is Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. I am a Airbnb superhost. I have one property that's currently on Airbnb, and I have several long-term rental properties. The property that I currently have on Airbnb, I used to have it as a long-term rental. The tenants that I had in there rarely cut their grass, never planted flowers, and their kids ran wild through the neighborhood. Now that it's an Airbnb, a friend of mine told me about Airbnb, and I decided to take my chance at it, which was 2 years ago. I've had nothing but good reviews since I've had this on Airbnb. The grass gets cut every week. I plant flowers. The yard is kept immaculate. My neighbors, all of them have my phone number, so if anything were to happen, they would call me. In fact, the last time I was over there cutting grass, the neighbor asked me, how could they get an Airbnb? So I hear about some people having problems with their neighbors. It's just not happening everywhere. There may be some instances where it happens, but it's not happening everywhere. I just recently purchased a property that is in a neighborhood that's up and coming. It's not great yet, but I'm spending $80,000 to improve that property so that I can make it an Airbnb. If I was going to buy that property just as a long-term rental, I would put maybe $5,000 or $10,000 in it. Put some paint and carpet and put some tenants in there. So we are definitely improving some of these neighborhoods. And the other thing about it, personally, I learned a lot more about Columbus. I lived in Columbus all my life. And putting a property on Airbnb, I had to investigate all of the things that Columbus has to offer. I used to want to leave Columbus because I said there's nothing to do in Columbus. But I found out there's a ton of things to do. There's something going on every week in Columbus. And I give this information to my Airbnb guests, and they love it. So we're making an impact on this city by having Airbnb. All of my guests are coming from all parts of the world, and they're families. They're not parties. I haven't had a single party at my property. In fact, in my rules, I state there's no parties. So I'm providing accommodations that's going to allow more people to come into Columbus and experience Columbus that they couldn't do at a hotel. And my property is probably 90% occupied.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any questions or comments? Mr. Remy?
Just 1 second. I do have a question. Are you a certified tourism ambassador?
Not certified,
All
but
right. Actually, it's a real thing through Experience Columbus, and so it's something to do.
all right.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Aaron, or Councilmember Page has a comment. That concludes all our speakers. Thank you, everyone. Councilmember Page?
I have a comment and a question, and a lot of it is based on just hearing everyone's testimony this evening and what you said. It was actually a great prelude into my question for staff. So the city of Columbus and Central Ohio is expected to experience an unprecedented amount of population growth over the next 20 to 30 years. And when we think about providing short-term rentals, we're providing for people who, families who are here for a short period of time. But when we think about those hundreds of thousands of people who want to make Columbus their home, how do we address that as like a future problem? If a lot of our housing is now being provided for short-term rentals, but we have great families who may have stayed in a rental for 3 months who are now deciding, I want to make Columbus my home, and they can't necessarily do that.
So thank you for the question. Everyone hear me? Or? Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, thank you for that question, because I do think it's a great one, and it really speaks to what the day cap is really aiming to get at. It really is a policy tool meant to keep housing stock available to residents for that longer term housing. And it really gets down to that fundamental question of whether or not a short-term rental is a commercial business that's operating in a residential area. So that's what that day cap is really about. It's not necessarily meant to get at whether someone's a good host or a bad host and how they're operating their short-term rental, but really more of that fundamental question of whether it's a commercial business that's operating in a residential area and taking potential housing away from residents. So.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, again, we want to thank you all. These hearings have been very helpful as we continue to evaluate what regulations, if any, would be best for our Columbus neighborhoods. We are going to go back. We've had over 50 speakers at these hearings, and we will continue to evaluate what could be there, and we'll work, again, with interested parties. We will let everyone know that we have record of, if we have your contact info, of what the kind of proposals or next steps may be, but we will again discuss both with the administration and among my colleagues where the legislation is. I see a hand, Gary. There is no deadline. You can always reach my office. Email me at mstenziano@columbus.gov or call the office 614-645-8084. I always appreciate the feedback, have enjoyed the emails we've received, and continue to appreciate everyone's engagement. Thank you all, and this will conclude our hearing.